You start with Anthony Evans because you know you've got a guy back who's got that proven production. And I already rounded off the stats: 67 catches, 831 yards, 4 touchdowns. Very good season for him. Got a few rushing attempts as well. Was a punt returner for the Bulldogs, so they didn't get a ton of big plays in that. I think he had like the one big punt return against Alcorn, maybe. And that was kind of it for him for the year. But a guy that can help you in special teams, a guy that can play a gadget-type role if you want to get him involved in jet sweeps. They lined him up in the backfield some last season and tried to hit him on routes out of the backfield. You could throw those swing passes to him. But also a guy that showed, as I talked about earlier, the ability to work the middle of the field and kind of be a possession receiver. And when State was in a have-to-have-it situation, they kind of went to Evans. And he primarily worked that short to intermediate passing game, but has the ability to win one-on-one down the field as well. They would put him out wide. Whenever they would get into those 2 tight end sets, they would keep Evans and Thompson as the 2 receivers on the field, and they would split Evans out. And what they're doing is obviously this is an offense that, regardless of what your personnel package is, you always kind of create those one-on-one opportunities on the outside because of the spacing of it all. But especially when you go 2 tight end and you bring those 2 tight ends tight to the formation, now as a defense, you're saying, okay, they've got to look favorable to run the football. We've got to be aggressive in how we defend the run against these looks. We want our safeties playing a little bit more downhill. But we're also, those receivers are truly out on an island because, again, when State would go 2 tight, it was rare that they would have anybody flexed out, to either slot. Sometimes they would do it with Sadu, but typically they would kind of get into those double wing type sets where you have 2 tight ends tight to the formation. So you've got all those bodies in tight to the line of scrimmage, tight to the center of the field, and the 2 receivers split outside the numbers. This is a true one-on-one opportunity. And obviously Brendan Thompson, that he's going to win in those chances, but Anthony Evans would win in those opportunities as well. You remember the first big play of the game against Florida. It's one of those deals where they're in a 12 personnel formation and they get the shot to Anthony Evans over top out wide. And he makes a great catch against current Bulldog corner Jamrock Grimsley when he makes that play. He's got the speed and the ability to win one-on-one, so you can move him around a little bit. Obviously, he's primarily going to be your slot receiver. That's where he's most effective, but you can put him out wide, and he can be very successful in that spot as well. I think State's got a lot of bodies who can handle that, but I would imagine, once again, when you see State getting to 12 personnel situations, they're not going to pull Anthony Evans off the field just because he's a slot receiver. They'll simply put him out wide and let him try to win in those opportunities. I think the biggest thing to watch with Ant is, for him, how does his relationship with Kamario Taylor continue to grow? There were some times last year where you could tell those two were not fully on the same page from a timing standpoint. A couple of plays against I know in the Egg Bowl there were a few plays. The Egg Bowl was kind of where stood out. He had a couple drops and a couple misses. You really want to see if those two can get on the same page consistently. I think it was kind of the same way in the bowl game. I'm trying to remember how the bowl game didn't have a huge game, if I remember correctly. No, he had the big catch against – I forgot. He had the one big reception in the bowl game, 4 catches for 80 yards. It was actually his most yards since the Arkansas game. But if you remember against Ole Miss, it was the one game that he was held without a catch. The only game he was held under 4 receptions for the game. So, 4 catches, 27 yards against Georgia. That's another game where Kamario was involved quite a bit. How their relationship grows is going to be kind of the big thing to watch when it comes to Anthony Evans. And if he can become that reliable target and the time he can get down between Kamario and Ant, I think it's going to be a really big year, and he's going to have a chance to be a 1,000-yard receiver for the Bulldogs. He obviously led the team in receptions a season ago, but that's going to be the next thing to watch. And part of it is also a Kamario thing as well, because as we mentioned, yes, Ant can win one-on-one down the field, but Ant is mostly that guy that they're working short to intermediate. Well, that's the part of the field where Kamario was still trying to grow as a quarterback and is going to have to continue to grow as a quarterback. Kamario is best just ripping it downfield, pure arm strength. His short intermediate passing game is where he kind of saw that some of the inaccuracy, the timing not quite there. That's something that's going to have to grow. And if that can happen, I think Anthony Evans is going to be in for a really big season. But you give yourself a high floor because you're going into the year. We've got a guy that can be productive within the SEC. Who complements him? And we'll go to the portal first, because State brought in a couple portal receivers, and the guy that I think the most attention is on, and the player that I think there's a lot of expectations for, is Marquise Johnson, who comes over from Missouri. This is a guy that for his career with the Tigers in 3 seasons, 66 catches for 1,075 yards and 6 touchdowns. Had a few rushing attempts as well. Didn't do much there. 5'11", 180, so another smaller guy, but a speed guy. I believe clocked at a 4.27 40, like official. So a guy who is supposed to be a very fast player and a guy that's supposed to be a big play threat. As a true freshman at Missouri, really had his best season. Fewest number of receptions, but his most yards and his most touchdowns. 13 catches for 383 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's 29.5 yards per reception. So he had a lot of big plays his first year for Mizzou, and that was sort of his role within that offense, as we are taking the deep shots downfield to you. And that was a Missouri team that had some good guys in the receiver room. Luther Burden was there. I believe Theo Weiss was there. They had a talented group of receivers. And he was not going to be the primary guy, but he played that role as the guy that, hey, a couple times a game, we're going to take a deep shot to you. And he had a big season as a true freshman because of it. And I think there were higher expectations on him coming into the next year. Kind of saw the workload increase a little bit, was still sort of supposed to be the deep threat guy, but, the offense just sort of took a little bit of a step back. He had more receptions, 25, but his yardage went down to 352, so 14 yards per catch. Only the 1 touchdown. Now, he had a big breakout game. Their bowl game against Iowa, he went, I think it was the Music City Bowl that year. I believe he went over 100 yards, had a touchdown. I think his touchdown was in that game. Really impressive season that the thought was, okay, he's going to be the guy. And that was, I think some Mizzou's top receivers were out of that game. Really had a chance to be featured. High expectations for him going into this past season. But again, it was kind of the same deal. Missouri's offense just didn't do him a lot of favors. Again, the yards per reception went down. 28 catches, but 340 yards, so just over 12 yards a catch. Had 2 touchdowns. Caught a couple big passes for them early in the season, but as the year went along, really just didn't get involved much. And I think Mizzou started kind of moving to a couple other guys. Had some frustrations. He expressed that with Bo Pribula. He's the guy that kind of very famously, if you watch that Missouri game against Alabama, Mizzou has a 4th down at the end of the game looking to try to go and win the ball game. And he is wide open for a 1st down. And Pribula just never sees him. Marquise Johnson kind of losing his mind over there where he was wide open. But, his time there is done. That offense didn't suit him well. I preamble all that to now go in and say, he's going to be well suited for what Jeff Levy wants to do offensively. This is a big play threat, a true speed threat, a guy that plays on the outside, and a guy that is able to consistently win one-on-one. And one of the things that I think he does a little bit different than Brennan, because he's not as fast as Brennan. I know, 4.27 is what he's listed as, I guess, and I believe that is supposed to be an official time. I'd imagine he's probably more in the 4.3 range, because I feel like a lot of those college times, even if they say they're laser timed, are a little bit inflated. And I do think Brennan just has more pure speed, but a slightly bigger frame and a guy that I think could be a little bit more physical at the point of attack, a guy that can kind of go up for the football more. That's something you saw quite a bit. We talked about Brennan, how many times he had to go and adjust to the football, which led to what should have been touchdowns turning into just really big plays. The same thing happened for Marquise Johnson. Both Brady Cook and then Bo Pribula throwing inaccurate passes. Johnson just has to go up for the football, and he showed the ability to win in those kind of contested catch situations. And could make some really impressive grabs, both going up for the ball, also diving down for the ball, adjusting in the air. So a good catch radius on him, despite not being the biggest guy. But again, a bigger frame than what you had with Brendan Thompson. But I think he's the guy that you expect to step in and fill this role. Very explosive player. And I think a great fit for what you want to do offensively. You fully expect he's stepping in and winning one of these starting jobs. And he's one of the guys, if you're just talking about players to watch in the spring as a whole, I know we talked specifically freshmen in the last episode. Season as a whole, he's a guy that you definitely want to the team as a whole, guy definitely going to want to keep close eyes on in the spring because of the potential there. Other transfer that comes in, Zion Ragens out of Oklahoma, a redshirt sophomore, 5'8", 170. Former four-star, another track guy. I mean, the Brennan Thompson mold, like a 10-3, 10-3-8 runner in the 100-meter dash in high school. Big-time speed guy with a small frame. Goes to Oklahoma, would have been recruited by Levy into that offense. And as a true freshman, had to make 5 starts and was thrust into action. Oklahoma had like 5 receivers get injured that year. And Harris was a guy that had to step in and saw some starting opportunities. Now, didn't have the production there, didn't get thrown to quite a bit. As we've talked about with Brennan Thompson that year in 2024, that offense was just dysfunctional top to bottom. And a receiver not putting up big numbers in that specific year of Oklahoma's offense clearly is not indicative of ability. We saw with Brennan, those guys can make a bigger role. Now, for a guy that's got that speed, was not necessarily asked to be a deep threat for OU. All of his receptions were kind of underneath. And just didn't get involved in a lot of big plays, didn't get a ton of targets, ton of opportunities. But a guy that in the few chances that he got looked like he actually has a pretty good catch radius for his size, can go up and snag the football. The big thing with him is speed, right? And we know that's what Jeff Levy is going to favor. That's what Jeff Levy wants out of his guys is I want guys who can go win one-on-one. I want fast guys at receiver. That's what they're going to recruit over anything else. Ragens is the guy that I made the dumb joke about online that people got very upset about over on Gene's page. Because I was like, can we please get one starting quality lineman? And it's like, nope, you're going to take another 5'8", 170 receiver who runs a 4.3 if you're Jeff Levy. It was a joke. Look, does not have nearly the same production as what you would have had from Brennan Thompson coming in, but you're profiling that type of player. And I don't know what his role is going to be this year. I mean, I imagine he's going to play. I think he'll probably be one of State's backups on the outside. Could potentially compete for a starting job. But another fast guy. And will Levy move him into the slot maybe? I don't know. That's the other thing we'll talk about here in a sec. Kind of got to figure out who your guys are going to be at slot receiver because that's where you don't have as much experience to this point after Anthony Evans. You don't really have any true slot guys. You have a slot guy on the roster, but you don't have a lot of guys that have played there exclusively. He played outside when he was at Oklahoma. The profile Jeff Levy has shown to this point is he doesn't care if a guy is short and doesn't care if he's not got a big frame. If you run 4.3, I'm putting you on the outside because I want to get you those one-on-one matchups. I'd imagine that's how Zion Ragens is going to be used, but we'll see. So 2 transfers coming in, one where you're banking on the ceiling, one that's got shown some production and some flashes where you can say, all right, in this system, you're going to thrive. Both of them, though, fit the profile of what you want for a receiver within this offense. For the guys returning on the roster, you start with Anthony. I keep wanting to say Anthony Evans. You start with Aiden Williams, right? Because he gets a little bit of that opportunity last season. Kind of takes over as a starter midway through the year, taking Jordan Mosley's job. And I know I already talked about this earlier, but I think it was a consistency thing that Levy felt compared to J-Mo. He was the more consistent receiver of the two. I thought when he did get targeted, he was pretty sure-handed, and I thought he was pretty physical. Probably one of the more physical receivers State had. I've said it many times, the best blocker in that group, which was a benefit to them, and having that on the field was helpful. But certainly not the player that he has been billed to be to this point in his career. You remember what he was coming out of high school, and he was the top-ranked receiver of the state of Mississippi. Goes to Ole Miss, and I think, as a true freshman, showed flashes, got a few opportunities, thought he was really going to take a bigger step forward in 2024, and it just didn't happen for him. You would see the clips come out from him in practices, and it's like, dude, this guy can play, which at this point I think people do need to understand just because the practice tape looks incredible doesn't always mean anything. I've seen that with a few State guys. They'll post their practice clips, and then a bunch of our fans like, what on earth is Levy doing? Why was this guy not in the game? Like, it's not like the coaches don't see these guys in practice. Let's be honest. But there was thought, like, okay, crowded receiver room at Ole Miss, comes to Mississippi State. Can he be the guy to really break out? And in the spring, you thought that was going to happen. Had a huge spring game. Really had a pretty good connection with Camario, it looked like. They would have gotten a lot of reps together with the other guys on the roster sort of being the first teamers. It just didn't really translate to the games. And again, he was playing for State. I thought with what he was asked to do, I thought he played well. And as I mentioned, there were some missed opportunities to him. You didn't see the explosive plays, though, which if you're a receiver in this offense, you kind of want a guy that can hit those explosive plays. That's a part of it. He's supposed to have it in him. Can he be that guy? This is the last chance, right? This is year 4 for him. He is a senior. This is the last go at it. At this point, I kind of lean towards Aiden Williams is who he is. Now, maybe, though, it finally clicks and he really fully puts it together. Maybe Shapen, when he was in, just felt better about Thompson and Evans. And especially when you know Brennan Thompson's always going to be open downfield, and then you know Anthony Evans is going to be your safety blanket, and you also know you don't really have a lot of time to do much else. Why would you not run plays designed to scheme those two open and target those two? That's a fair point, to be honest. He could have more of an opportunity this year. But if he doesn't take hold, I think the guy who's nipping at his heels is Frisco McGee, who obviously was a signee in Levy's first year, was kind of like the hidden gem of that receiver class where there was all the talk about Stonka Burnside, J.J. Harrell, Mario Craver. And Craver obviously made a big impact as a true freshman, but Harrell dealt with an injury, redshirts, transfers out. Stonka gets good playing time, but as a receiver just wasn't able to get much of anything going. Shines in special teams, and it's like, hey, man, you need to be playing safety. Move him to safety. Redshirts this past year. Now he's going to Memphis where he's going to play receiver. And obviously Craver transfers out. The 3 guys who were your 3 4-star receivers from that class all gone. Frisco McGee's the one guy that's back, and Frisco's the one guy that was always talked about, man, makes big-time plays. The guy can make some really impressive catches. He's going to be a special guy when it all comes together. And just was never getting on the field until finally you see it live in a game against Wake Forest in the bowl game, makes that big play, gets the one big opportunity, and he makes the absolute most of it. Should we let that one play tell us that that's the player that he is? No. But we've heard a ton about this guy. He took full advantage of the opportunity he was given, which some of these other guys we've heard about haven't done that. A guy like Ricky Johnson that transferred out, we heard a ton of good things about Ricky Johnson. Ricky never did anything when he did get in a game. Had a couple catches. That was it. And I'm not trying to dog Ricky Johnson. He's at Utah now. We'll see what happens with him playing for Chad Bumpus again. But Frisco, at least in the one big chance he got, made the most of it. Now, what does that look like going into this year? And can he take over? And he looks like a more explosive player than what you've seen from Aiden Williams at this point. I think that's going to be a really tight battle for that starting outside receiver spot opposite of, I'm assuming Marquise Johnson's got one of those jobs taken care of. But that's going to be a big battle for sure. And Frisco is a guy I'm very excited to see going into the spring. And that's going to be a close battle to watch. A couple other guys on the roster, just to mention briefly. I talked about in the slot, they don't have a true proven option after Anthony Evans. I think Grayson Harris is your guy there. I mean, he was listed as slot receiver a season ago. I think he's your number 2 going into the season. Was a good get for State. They got him, flipped him from Oklahoma in last year's class. Didn't really get much of an opportunity this past year. I think caught one pass in the bowl game. But can he take another step forward? Bull Mitchell, another guy they signed last season, 5'11", 210. I mean, dude, go play running back, although State doesn't really need him. But that was another guy that State signed going into last season. He's back again. Can he take another step forward? It's going to be an opportunity. And then Matt Mayfield as JUCO signee, 6'2", 185, very fast, was a big play threat for Colin last season. Didn't get a ton of catches, ton of opportunities, but was sort of their big play guy in that offense. Still very raw as a player and needs some development to this point. It's kind of been a journey getting him to Starkville. But look, a ton of athleticism, big frame. That's one of the things I didn't really talk about with Frisco, with Aiden Williams. Those are some of your bigger frame receivers. You'd like to have a guy like that, a rangy guy to play on the outside. Can Matt Mayfield fill that role? It's possible. Now, last guys we'll talk about at receiver, last guy. State brought in 4 signees at the receiver position in this class. A really good receiver group, probably one of the best receiver signing classes based on what actual film that we've seen in quite some time. Only one of those guys enrolled in the spring, though, and I talked about him in our last show for freshmen to watch in the spring. And while he's probably the guy that has gotten, you could argue, the least talked about of the four, the fact that he's here in the spring tells you that he may get a leg up on the guys, and that's Keemian Henderson out of Carthage, Texas. I can't talk. 6'4", 190, another big frame receiver on the outside. Explosive player, big play threat in high school. A lot of range. I'm going to be curious to see him in the spring. And I talked about this, I know, back on Thursday. Can he take advantage of this opportunity that, hey, there's spots available at receiver because you don't have outside of Anthony Evans, you don't have a proven guy in that room. Truly proven. Aiden is proven to an extent, but a proven guy that you would say that is a surefire go-to receiver in the SEC, you have one. Who do you have after that? There's going to be an opportunity for Keemian Henderson. And I think to get a leg up, even though guys like Jaden Creation, Zion Crumpton, even Camden Capehart, I've probably gotten more hype around them because of some of the production. And also those guys were in the class a lot longer. Henderson was a late add going into this year's class. He's here for the spring. So can he take advantage and get those reps early on? We'll see. I think it's a good group. I think once those other freshmen I mentioned get in, it's going to get even better. They need some guys to step up for sure. You need to know that you got a guy, at least one, that you can consistently trust to get open downfield and be that threat to stretch the defense. But I think they've got too many options for that to not come through. I feel very good about Marquise Johnson being that guy. I think they've got a good chance that this is the year you have a true number 3 that you can kind of count on a little bit more. So, because, look, if it's not going to be Aiden Williams, I think Frisco McGee can challenge. I think one of these freshmen coming in has the ability to challenge. Maybe it's Zion Ragens coming in as a transfer. There's a lot of potential in this room. I think it's going to be a good group. Maybe not the same ton of experience that you would love, but I think State's in a good spot at receiver, and you can trust this to be a productive group overall.